Hi everyone and welcome back. In today's video I'm doing another digital art tutorial and I'm going to be focusing on highlights, gradients and texture, and I'm going to be finishing off the piece that we've been working on throughout this beginner digital art tutorial series. And if you haven't already gone ahead and watched the first 3 videos of this series, I highly recommend you do, because we covered sketching, line art and shading, and today we're going to be finishing off the piece we've been working on. And I'm using my Huion GT191 graphics monitor tablet, and I think it's a really good tablet, especially for beginners if you're looking to get a graphics monitor like this. I have a full review video of it. It's linked in the iCard, so you can go check it out if you'd like more information. And I'm also using a Photoshop CS6, and I'm using default brushes and default settings for the monitor and for Photoshop. So what I've gone ahead and done is I've created a new layer, and if you look to the right hand side you can see all my layers. I have the colour, I have the shading, and then on top of everything else I've put the highlights. And the way that I approach doing highlights is that I tend to do 2 types of highlights. So I have when I'm doing highlights that I want to pop, like the highlights in her eyes, I have my brush set to 100% opacity. But when I want to do some highlights in her hat, or perhaps on her chin or on her cheek, where I don't want it to pop so much, I just want to add a tiny little highlight to just notate where the light is bouncing off, and I want it very subtle, I set the opacity down a lot. So here I've got it all the way down to 27%, and as you can see on the hat I'm just adding little lines, little sort of flicks with my brush. So I start with my brush. I'm pressing light on the brush because I'm using a monitor that has the sensitivity levels. I can do this, and most pen tablets will have this ability. So I'm pressing light on the brush, then I'm pressing harder, and then I'm going light again, so I can get a kind of a nice flick and a nice line weight going on for the highlights. And I'm just kind of going around and I'm adding highlights wherever I think it's necessary. Now up in the hat I'm adding not just little lines to the flowers, but I'm adding some sparkles. And for this, what I've done here is I've moved, the important thing here is that the highlight layer is above all the other layers. It's above the line art layer, it's above the shading and the colour, so that the highlights will stand out on top of everything else. And sometimes, as you can see, I'm putting more than one type of highlight. So I have on the hat, I have the highlights that have the opacity down, and I also have highlights with the opacity all the way up to the fullest, to 100%. And that just adds some sort of extra dimension. Now, the adding sort of dots and sparkles, and the way that I do that is I add dots and then I draw these little stars, as you saw earlier in the hat. That is entirely optional. I like to do quite a lot of highlights. I like the way it looks and I like how it brings the drawing to life. But if you don't like it, then you definitely don't have to do it. I'm just showing you guys how I approach doing it today. And I'm just going around adding some light to pretty much all the different areas. And you can always step backwards and undo what you don't like. And the important thing is to zoom out every now and again just to kind of see how it's looking. So now I'm going to be doing the gradient in the background. So I have a rectangle here, which I filled with this nice buttercup yellow colour. And then I'm going to layer style, then I'm going to gradient overlay. And as you can see, it's turned the layer into black, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the colours down there at the bottom in the gradient editor panel, and I'm picking that nice yellow at one end, and then at the other end I'm picking a pink, so that it doesn't gradient, so it gradiates from yellow into pink. And as you can see, you can move these little levers backwards and forwards, and you can really play around with how you want your gradient to look, and you can add other colours in there as well. So I really suggest you play around in the gradient editor, and there are some presets as well. The other thing over here in the gradient overlay panel, you can adjust the angle of the gradient, so you could have it going in a different direction. I've got it at 90. Yes, at 90 degrees. So I want it just kind of coming down. And you can also adjust the scale, and you can adjust whether it's what sort of gradient it is. You can just do a lot of playing, and I do think it's really nice just to play around and I went ahead and I made the colours a bit darker. So I'm going ahead and I'm making the very end. The very end colours much darker. So I actually end up with 2 yellows and 2 pink colours on the gradient, so that you get that really nice gradation from dark pink, lighter pink, then into the peachy colour in the middle. And you can adjust the scale. You can just do a lot, and I suggest you play around with that. And the other important thing about this rectangle is that I've placed it behind all the other layers. So it's right at the very back, it's beneath the colour layer. And that's very important because that will make sure that everything else on top of it stands out from it. And I really like this style where you put a box behind the character, but you leave certain parts of the character sticking out, so her hat and her hair is kind of coming outside of the box. I really like that effect. And as you can see up there by the eye, because I've placed the gradient behind everything, the eyes weren't completely coloured in. So, you know, when you're doing that, you may have to go in and add a little bit of extra colour. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding a white outline around the girl. And so I've made a new layer again, and I've placed the layer in between the colour layer and the rectangle layer, so that it will be on top of the rectangle, but behind all the line art and behind all the colouring. And that makes it very easy to draw a white line all the way round. And it does take a little bit of time doing this step, but it really helps the piece to pop in the end. And I've just got the brush, I've set it quite large, I've got it at 72. Opacity up at 100, and I'm just kind of roughly going round. And as you can see, I'm not going to go round the blue vine type plants on her hat, because it wouldn't make it would just get blobby very quickly, and it wouldn't really have much punch. So I'm just kind of going around the whole outside. And I do this kind of thing when I'm doing traditional illustrations. If you were doing a Copic piece or a marker, pencil, watercolor, you again outlining it in some white makes her pop from the background, and it can also make her look a little bit like a sticker. And I really like the effect it gives. So that's how I created the gradient in the background and the highlights. Now I'm going to add some texture. Now what I've got here is I've got a picture of kind of like a wood panel, and I'm placing it on top of all the other layers. I've just imported it in, and now this wood panel is actually it's a picture that I took of an old wood table. And that's something, if you are interested in getting some textures into your piece, if you take your phone and you go around and take some pictures of tabletops, of gravel, of mud, of things that you can put into your artwork, and you don't even need to go online for most of this stuff, because we all have tables in our houses. We all, even taking a picture of the tiled floors, they all make really nice gradients. So what I've done is I've blown the picture up, and then I've put the opacity all the way down to about 4%. So it's really, really far down. And you can play with how much opacity you want, how much you want. And as you can see, I'm playing around here. So what I end up doing at the moment, the wood panel is over everything. It's over the girl, and it gives it this really grungy vintage effect. But I decide that I don't want it quite that grungy, so what I ended up doing is I put the opacity down to about 16%, and then I'm dragging the wood layer all the way down so that it's under the girl but on top of the gradient, so that what you get is this nice soft grunge background, textured background, but she's on top of it, and she has a very clean look. So that's how you can put in some texture. Now, as I said, I'm sure, as I said in some of the other tutorials as well, I'm sure there are loads of ways that you can do this in Photoshop. Loads of ways that you can put texture in, and there are loads of different settings that I haven't talked about in this video. Partly because this is a beginner tutorial, and I just wanted to show you how you can create this piece of artwork in real time, step by step. You can employ different techniques to get to make a really nice piece, but also I didn't want to overcomplicate it for you guys, and this is the way that I like to work, and this is the way that I'm showing you. But as I said, there are so many different ways you can do it. The way that I think it's a good way to learn from tutorials online is just to watch loads of them, and to take different aspects from each tutorial that you feel fit your art and your workflow, and that way you can kind of develop your own way of working based on lots of different sources. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, please make sure you leave them down in the comments below, and I'll do my best to answer you. And I really hope that you found these videos helpful if you were looking for some tutorials. And yes, anyway, I hope you all enjoyed it, and have a wonderful week, and I will see you next time.